So this past Sunday, Prime Minister Mark Carney was in Rome for Pope Leo's first Mass, and afterwards he was quizzed by journalists about his priorities back home, including about why there wouldn't be a budget this spring.
It's a very short parliamentary session that is coming up. The speech from the throne is on the 27th, as people know. The House is due to rise under the House's rules by the 20th of June, so it's really 3 weeks. We have some very clear priorities, which would include the federal government taking all the steps it can to help create one Canadian economy out of 13. In addition, initiatives such as the middle class tax cut. But there will be a budget in the fall.
That's a pretty big to-do list for the 4 short weeks Parliament is going to be in session.
And most of that to-do list has to do with his biggest election promise, dealing with the U.S. and President Trump.
That is definitely the focus of this upcoming session of Parliament, but there are a lot of other things to deal with right now, too, from another potential Canada Post strike to the upcoming G7 summit he is hosting, and guess who's coming to that? Donald Trump, to the demands from premiers, the looming threat of an Alberta sovereignty referendum, and that's just the top of the list. I'm Catherine Cullen, host of CBC's The House.
I'm Daniel Thibeault, host of Radio-Canada's political show Les Coulisses du Pouvoir.
And I'm Jason Markusoff, producer and writer for CBC in Calgary.
And together, we are House Party, a weekly podcast diving into the big burning questions about this new government. And this week we're asking, is taming Trump still Carney's top priority? Okay, guys, let's get down to business. Is Donald Trump still on the top of Mark Carney's to-do list? Jason, what do you think?
It comes in waves. I mean, I think Trump is always present as what's the worst thing that could happen? The worst thing that could happen for Carney and Canada is Trump. And if I'm sounding like I'm hedging on this answer, maybe it's because of where I am. In Alberta, we produce the biggest export. Oil and gas are by far the biggest exports to the U.S. And those are not really being tariffed right now. So it might be a different thing if you're sitting in Quebec or Ontario, where the steel, aluminum, and auto parts tariffs loom large. So let me throw it back to you guys, that question.
It's a very good point, and probably depends on where you live in the country. I'm sure if you ask the question to someone in southwestern Ontario who works in the auto industry, they feel like it's still the biggest thing that should be on the agenda of the federal government. And rightly so, because their job, their livelihood is in jeopardy right now. If you go into the softwood lumber world in Quebec, in rural Quebec, same thing. Aluminum in Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean, same thing. But from where I sit right now, I feel like it's not the first thing that's on the agenda, right? It kind of faded away, or it kind of dropped down from a few steps, just because it went well when he went to DC, just because the tone down on the 51st state. The new U.S. ambassador to Canada came in and said, "We moved on. It's over. We're not doing that. Let's turn the page on the 51st state." And in the meantime, there's so many big things here, like the cabinet, the retreat, the session that's starting, the budget that was not supposed to happen, and now it's happening in the fall. But and all just that relationship with the province, finding big infrastructure project on June the 2nd when they all meet, the Prime Minister and the Premier in Saskatoon. All of that feels it's just a bit of a priority right now, more than the U.S. thing was even just a month ago.
I guess the other way of looking at that, though, is all of these things are offshoots of this core question for Canada, which is about Donald Trump, right? So if you are talking about tearing down internal trade barriers, that's a big priority for Mark Carney, right? What is that about? Well, that's about trying to beef up Canada's economy in the face of the U.S. tariffs. If you're talking about defense, well, actually, that is about the U.S. being a less reliable partner on defense. I think you could even make the case, perhaps it's a bit more tenuous, but the conversation around national unity, which is in many ways about the Alberta resource sector, is still fundamentally about Trump. I mean, you could reframe it. What comes to mind for me is that old 1992 James Carville Chestnut, it's the economy, stupid, right? The Democratic strategist. He said when it comes, they were talking about the election campaign at the time. One of the things you needed to know, it's always about the economy. And it comes back to that in politics. But I don't think you can talk about the Canadian economy without sort of seeing Donald Trump sitting right on top of it.
It all feels like they're all spin-off of the main question. But it feels like they have a life of their own now. It feels like they're there. And they're not going to go away if the U.S. situation gets solved. Like, it's still there. It's still going to be there because it's still something we realized that it was important, it was needed, and now we need to do something about it.
But I think the framing, and I think that because Mark Carney was so electorally successful with framing things as all roads leading through Trump, it's almost like that James Carville question, Catherine, the U.S. strategist you talked about. It would be, is Trump-proofing the economy stupid? That's, I think, where it all would fit together in their aegis. Because, yes, I mean, Daniel's right. There is, even before Trump, there was this obligation before Trump came back and was threatening Canada, there was still this obligation to meet the NATO requirement of 2% of GDP spent on military purposes. But it just becomes more... there becomes more of kind of a foot on Canada's throat or near Canada's throat because Trump is threatening more things. I mean, I don't know. I feel like the threat, like the immediate threat, the 51st state thing, the worry of us getting the same severe tariffs, like the 10%, 20%. I don't know. Does that feel off now? Does it feel on pause now?
I think it depends where you work in the economy. I mean, you look at the big picture economic numbers for Canada. If you work in the auto sector, the threats don't feel off. If you look at what's happening across the Canadian economy, those threats don't feel off. I think we need to ask ourselves, though, what is actually happening in terms of Canada trying to negotiate with the United States? How much do we really know about that, Dan?
We don't know much about that, but it feels like it's everyone I talk to seem to think that it's going in a bit of a positive way. And we had Mélanie Joly on the show last weekend, on my show, and she was hinting that something, we might come up with something within the next few weeks.
She said that to me too.
All right. Well, share interviewees. And so that to me leads me to believe that they know something that we obviously don't know, or they feel something that we don't know, or they have an optimism that they didn't have a few months ago.
It was interesting. So she was saying that what she said on the House was we could have a deal within weeks, perhaps in a couple of months. And then I said, well, that's pretty striking. And she said, well, look at what happened with the UK. But the thing is, Canada doesn't want the deal.
Same thing.
Not at all. And in fact, the deal with the UK keeps some tariffs, a baseline 10% tariffs on. Canada doesn't want that. But then you also had Trump's new ambassador to Canada, Pete Hoekstra, speaking to a business group and also sounding really optimistic. The thing I can't quite get at is whether there's a there or whether this is just like good vibes coming off that Trump-Carney meeting. We know that there are supposed to be more discussions, but to what extent is everybody just saying, rah, we're rowing in the same direction versus like actual meaningful movement happening, way below the tip of the iceberg?
Yeah.
I mean, you think about how, even just the normal, more ordinary in the Trump world context, how long the USMCA, NAFTA, CUSMA negotiations took. I mean, these things take time. The other thing I would add to your point about Britain was that they were negotiating the post-EU Brexit trade deal for a while. So this was long in brewing, had some signs before when Biden was still president. But I think what we can say is, part of the iceberg that's over the water. You think about what could have gone wrong, and I think this always strikes me as Trump is always going to be the priority because things could go disastrously. Could slide off the rails, go crazy, very, very easily and fast. You think he had that meeting shortly after the election with Trump, and went off as well as you could hope, more or less, barring any having any actual deals. He meets with J.D. Vance, and J.D. Vance can sometimes blow up in people's faces. Look at how he handled things in Greenland, where he, largely insulted the locals. He had that very tense situation with Pope Francis, and then Pope Francis died. So things
correlation, not causation.
So yeah. Well, I've been reading some things online, but just joking. But he met with Vance, and nothing went off the rails. Everything seems to be going on the rails, which I think for Trump relations these days, maybe the most you could ask for. I don't know.
Yeah, it's the new normal, eh?
Well,
it's weird.
The only thing I keep thinking is guys, he's coming to visit, right? We all know how the G7 in Charlevoix went, which is it
that
went
didn't go
fine.
it went fine until it
left.
didn't. Yeah.
But we're getting ahead of ourselves. And I really want to talk about the budget. This is the moment where you really have to embrace your own political nerdiness. When you say, guys, I really want to talk about the budget. But I do, because I am so confused about what happened over the course of the last few days. So we had François-Philippe Champagne, finance minister, coming out and saying, folks, we couldn't possibly with the budget, not prudent right now. Yes, there'll be a fall economic statement, but no budget until next year. Wait a few days. Mark Carney shows up at the news conference we heard at the top of the podcast in Rome and says, oh, yeah, of course, budget. There's definitely a budget. Dan, what happened?
Okay, so I think it's a symptom of one of the issue that Carney needs to take care of, which is internal matters. Like the mechanic of his government is not quite up to par at this point, and he needs to work on that before he can focus on anything else. Last week, François-Philippe Champagne, finance minister, and someone was telling me those decisions, it's not like a full cabinet thing. It's usually between the finance minister and the prime minister. Walks out in the foyer of the House of Commons and says, there's a sequence of events. We need to table the bill to lower taxes. Then there's a throne speech, and then we'll have a fall economic statement. First of all, that sequence is wrong. You need to start with the throne speech and then you table the bill. Second of all, he kind of cornered himself by saying there's not going to be a budget this year. We're going to do like an update later, which in itself is completely weird. The last time we didn't have a budget was a pandemic year in 2020. And there was a reason for that. There was a budget. There was a date. Morneau was supposed to table something on March the 30th, 2020. And it just, everything went out the window. And so he put everything on hold, and he dealt with the pandemic and the situation that was at hand. And they came back with the budget the year after. We're not in the same situation.
Yeah.
I think Carney realized that it was going to look bad for someone who ran this whole campaign on the economy and the need to manage the public finance in a better way. And so he corrected the whole thing when he was in Rome by saying, no, there'll be a budget in the fall. But all of this to say, if you have a good office, if the Prime Minister's office is staffed properly and you've got the right people in the right place, and those issues are managed on a daily basis, you don't end up in situations like that. And that should be a top priority right now. Hire a chief of staff, a permanent one, principal secretary, the issue management people, the right people. Make sure you've got this, because right now he doesn't have that.
It's wild.
The ministers don't have chief
Yeah.
of staff. They don't have staff either. That needs to be priority number one before they can move to anything after, because if it's not done, issues like that will arise again.
Yeah, and I think it could just seem like a blip. And let's be honest, it is. I mean, was it Cher who said if it's not a problem in 5 years, it's not a problem? It's not like we will be thinking about the 4 days where we thought we weren't going to have a budget in 2025 years from now. But I do think the part where you're stepping on yourself, right, when your principal message is the economy, and then for days, you sort of let it ride, this idea that, in fact, we're not really going to offer folks one, and then course correct. Like, it's just needless messiness, and it makes you wonder who's captaining the ship, like what the heck's going on here. And they definitely, I would say, need to avoid that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, we'll see, we will see a budget. I think if there still was not one in, waiting a whole year, it would be really confusing to people. I think that people elected Mark Carney to put his fiscal stamp on things, be a better financial steward, economic steward than Trudeau. You'd think that Mark Carney putting out a budget would be something he was clamoring to do, to put his mark on this, his stamp on things. And so this weird, I don't know if we have time thing, it was strange. It's one thing for Mark Carney, who's new at this, to kind of have that blunder, but Champagne's been in cabinet for most of his career since 2015. So you'd think that they would be a bit more adept at this, have a better political radar. But, the new government smell on this new car is still wafting.
What does a
off,
new government smell like?
And by the way, the other issue, by making that the issue that day, everyone completely forgot that the main thing they wanted to announce that day was this fake paper that he signed in cabinet saying, I order my finance minister to lower income taxes.
It was this strange, emulation of Trump, right? He signed, in fact, I don't even know what the term, it wasn't a real thing. There was a piece of paper that said basically, I'm Mark Carney.
A notice to the finance minister, something that has no value.
We're going ahead with an income tax cut. But the thing is, this may conjure images of Donald Trump in an executive order. You can't do that in Canada. It's just not the way it works. No. It didn't mean it's fake in the sense that it didn't mean anything. We actually have to get legislation passed through the House of Commons, the Senate, royal assent, the whole kit and caboodle before the tax cut can actually be a reality. And I don't understand what the purpose of that piece of theater is. So for me, I don't think it was the worst thing. It got interrupted.
It was supposed to make the news that day. It was supposed to be the thing that, our priority is to lower your taxes. And yet, at the end of the day, we just ended up being reminded or being told that there would be no budget, and so we talked about that and not about the tax cut.
But it's unserious and a little bit off-brand.
I mean, this is not the first time he did it. He also did it to cancel the carbon tax.
The carbon tax. Yeah.
Yes, although I thought in that case it had an impact because he could say, well, we're not going to go ahead with this existing thing, whereas you can't order, and I'm not, I'm
I think
an email
I
procedural
think it was a regulation thing the first, yeah.
Yes, whereas this, you can't, unleash a tax cut just by signing a piece of paper, which is too bad because otherwise I'd be cutting all my own taxes right now. So while I'm busy not giving myself tax cuts, Jason, how high on the priority list does keeping the country together and the prospect of a referendum on secession in Alberta go on the Mark Carney list, do you think?
I mean, so we think about why Trump was on top of the priority list, and it was, in my mind, because, what could go terribly wrong and what could go disastrous and what's sort of this black swan wild event that just pushes everything off to the side of the agenda. And to me, the issue on Mark Carney's plate that has that potential is not housing, not crime, these long grinding issues, internal economy, internal trade. It's the idea that Canada could be broken up by Alberta secessionists. We're not there yet. Right? Let's keep in mind that the talk is up, the threat is up. There's a movement now. There's a movement working towards forcing the Alberta government to put a referendum question on the ballot in 2026 if some of the secessionists get together. But right now, it's not there. I mean, yes, it seems like Carney is going to be compelled to do something, make some concessions, do some of the things he was already talking about doing regarding pipeline approval, faster approvals of projects, maybe easing some of Trudeau's climate regulations. But does everything have to be brushed off the side of his table to deal with this immediate threat? Maybe not yet. At least that's from this vantage point. What do you guys think? I mean, should he be brushing everything off the table to deal with this and get this, tamp this brush fire out right away, if that's even possible?
I don't know. I think it needs to be in the forefront. I think he needs to think about it. I don't know if it needs to be priority number one in managing the whole of the country. What I'm curious to know from you, Jason, though, is that when he meets with the premiers in Saskatoon on June the 2nd to talk about the economy, allegedly, but how much of Alberta sovereignty will tint that conversation, coming from Daniel Smith or anyone else from that matter?
Well, it'll be interesting to see how that tinges how other premiers view her and what she's doing. Scott Moe is, facing a bit of a sovereignty crisis himself there, where there are some separatists, but is not quite as hurtling toward inevitable referendum there. Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, has already pushed back some. Legault, a Quebec Premier, may have something to say. The Eastern premiers, who are very rah-rah Canada, may have something to say. I think everybody's going to be saying, and Doug Ford has said this, you've got to deal with what's beefing Alberta, what Alberta has grievances about. You have to deal with that. So I think that will be front and center. That is the most immediately pokey thing within the confederal relation. If confederal is a word.
You said it with conviction, and I admire that.
Thank you. And then the conviction just went right away.
I was thinking Scott Moe might be under pressure from Lloydminster, who's sitting right at the border, right between Alberta and Saskatchewan. There's probably some pressure from...
Is Lloydminster divisible? I don't know. We'll find out. But it was a deliberate choice to put it in Saskatoon, put it in the Prairie West. Yeah. And I think Mark Carney, people will be looking for Mark Carney to produce something to lower the temperature or something as an olive branch or something. And then the big question is, does Danielle Smith accept a compromise? That's a big one to me, and I'll tell you why. I look at how she reacted to the cabinet picks last week. She didn't acknowledge the fact that there is an Alberta minister for the first time in several years. She didn't acknowledge the fact that Tim Hodgson is the new energy minister, a guy the oil industry loves. He has capital investment experience, worked for Goldman Sachs. He was on the board of an oil sands company named Meg Energy. But she didn't even acknowledge that. All she acknowledged was the fact that Julie DeBruze, the new environment minister, who hasn't really spoken unless I've missed something, has had some Stephen Guilbeault, the former environment minister, policies like his. So she's looking at a water glass that's half full and not even seeing water in it. So will she look at some concessions that are not exactly what she wants and claim victory, or will she keep the energy up until she gets everything she wants? And that's got to be one of the interesting questions to come out of what's to come in Saskatoon.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So I'm heading to Saskatoon to cover it, which I'm really excited about. But the question that comes to my mind listening to you to speak about this is the extent to which Danielle Smith is the correct barometer for this question. And I don't know the answer, right? Yeah. Because she has a lot of political forces that she is wrestling with right now, too. Both, and Jason, you were so great on Front Burner about this week, if people want to know more. But both the dynamics within her own party in terms of support for Alberta sovereignty, but also, let's face it, a real political problem in terms of a situation she's dealing with vis-a-vis questions about Alberta Health Services, some of the actions that her former chief of staff took, different contracts, how they were handed out, like basically just a big sort of mess of very political, pokey questions.
Lots there, yeah.
And how much of this is about finding a target in a time of political turmoil for her versus the actual question of keeping the country together and keeping Albertans, by and large, feeling like they're being heard in this country. Because I know as somebody who spent a lot of her life in Quebec, I have sometimes a real beef when people say, well, those people who want to tear the country apart. And I think that misunderstands the secessionist or sovereigntist impulse. It's not about the primary motivation isn't tearing the country apart. It's protecting your own interests. The people aren't setting out to tear apart the country. They're setting out to trying to chart a better path forward for themselves and their families. And again, we have to hear each other, even if we don't always like what we're hearing on this front.
I mean, it's hard to compare the two. I know what you're saying, and I think that's a good point not to be so cynical about Alberta separatists who have legitimate grievances, who feel like their economy and their way of life is being held back. But, I don't know, it strikes me that there may be more of an animus toward Ottawa. Like, it's, Dan can totally tell me if I'm wrong, but in Quebec, the separatist movement is we are our own people. We are separate. We do not really feel like we belong in Canada. Whereas in Alberta, it's an anti-Ottawa animus developing potentially into an anti-Canada animus.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think from talking about sovereignty, why not talk about the king?
The sovereign.
Yeah. Someone who's not super popular in Quebec. That's one thing that, and I agree with Jason, just to piggyback on what he was saying. It's not an anti-Canada sentiment in Quebec. It's more of a, what can we do to protect our language, protect our culture, it's more of a, how do we protect ourselves? And I think you made allusion to that particular take earlier. And that's probably one of the major difference between what we're seeing right now in Alberta. The king, I don't know how much the king is liked in Alberta, but he's not super liked in Quebec, or at least they don't really care that much about him. In fact, the Bloc Québécois, as mentioned, that they would not go into the Senate to hear the speech. They rarely,
speech from the throne.
Yeah, they rarely go. They usually don't go. But François Blanchette was saying, sometimes we some of our MPs are going just out of curiosity. They want to take a look and see how it goes. And this time around, there was a very clear message that was sent to the whole caucus saying, we don't want to see you there because it's not the message we want to send. It's not, they don't agree with the whole thing. It's an interesting way for Carney to mark the beginning of the session. The joke that's going around right now in Quebec is that at least there'll be some good French in the speech if it's read by the king, as opposed to by the Governor General, who has a bit of an issue with her French.
Oh my goodness! It's like a deep cut. The political jokes there. I'm really interested in this question of what the weight is of having the king read the speech from the throne. Is this just like a clever PR move? And I hate to put it that way. I know if there are monarchists out there listening to us, they might be deeply offended. But is it really just a little like coup for Carney to show that Canada's got some heft? The world will be looking at us this day. Look, our sovereign's here. The sovereign respects us. Elbows up, etc., etc. Or is there some deeper meaning, something more important happening here?
If we go back to what we were saying at the beginning of this podcast and how the U.S. issue, is the U.S. still the number one issue? Back when the decision was made to bring the king here, it was the biggest issue, and I think it would have resonated a lot in that particular context, given that the threat doesn't feel like it's as strong now as it was 2 months ago. I don't know if it's going to have the same kind of impact.
I think there's going to be something compelling about having some of Carney's rhetoric shared by the king, and I think that people will be seeing it not as the King of Canada, but as the King of England. It's like an ally. It's like getting Keir Starmer in a way, almost, to say they want to take us. Kind of like UK repping for Canada in a way. It's kind of an ally speaking our language, even though he is our sovereign.
But it's just a flex, right? Is the king coming here just a flex, or is it anything more than that? It sounds like you're saying flex.
Well, it's like, look, the whole role is symbolism, right? I mean, yes, monarchists are going to jump all over us now, but it's it's symbolic. It's one thing for Carney to say it, but putting Carney's words into King Charles's mouth, I mean, that's going to get just much more global attention. So to your point earlier, Catherine, yeah, it's a PR move. Is it going to be an effective one? We shall see what kind of all caps Truth Social Trump will reply afterwards.
He likes the king. He might just be impressed. We'll see.
And he likes Carney too so far. So.
Yeah.
All right, well, next week, then, I think we know what we're going to be doing, guys. We're going to be taking a closer look at that speech from the throne. See you then.
Is that a royal invitation, Catherine?
Right then, cheerio.
So, Jason. I don't know. Nice try.
I have a week to work on it.
You got a week to work on it. Okay, well, that is it for House Party this week. Thanks, as always, to my co-hosts Jason Markusoff and Daniel Thibeault, and thanks to the production team, Caitlin Crocker, Jennifer Chevalier, and Carla Hilton. Be sure to give us a follow in the podcast feed for The House so you can catch both House Party and my other show, The House, every week. 2 shows, 1 feed. The House will be with you on Saturday, and House Party will be back next Wednesday with another big, burning political question. Spoiler alert, it might have something to do with the king.